Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Behave with Sue. My name's Sue Cowley and in this video I'm going to be talking about the subject of consequences. Now you've set your expectations, you made it clear what you want, you've tried to motivate the children to do those things in terms of their learning and their behaviour, but sometimes you'll still get misbehaviour. And in some situations you'll still get misbehaviour a lot of the time, depending on the setting in which you work. So something that you have to think about is, what are the consequences going to be of poor behaviour, of making the wrong choices? And it's useful to remember that consequences don't necessarily have to be punitive. So they can be sanctions. They can be things like detentions, loss of privileges, loss of playtime, those kind of things. But a consequence can just as easily be about having a conversation, having a more restorative approach, where the child thinks about what they've done, how it affected other people, and what they might do to avoid that situation in the future. Now, when I work with teachers, whether trainees, NQTs, or in a school, one of the exercises I get them to do is I get them to think about their own behaviour around consequences. So I'll explain how I do that to you now. So I say to the teachers, can you raise your hand if you've ever broken the law? And of course, a few hands go up and people look at you and they're like, is it okay to admit this? And then I change the question slightly and I say, okay, raise your hand if you drive a car and you've ever broken the law. And of course, lots of hands go up because let's face it, at some time or another, most of us will have exceeded the speed limit. So I talk the teachers through a story of somebody driving down the motorway. And I said, what speed are they doing? Well, they're doing 80, 85. Okay, but they know the rule. Why is it that they're breaking the rule? Why are they breaking the law? And we talk about all the reasons why that might be. So one of the reasons why you might be breaking the law, breaking the rules, is because everybody else is doing it. Another reason might be because you think, well, there's no harm in it. Or it might be that you think, well, the rule is a bit silly these days because most cars can safely do 80 miles an hour. And then I say to the teachers, okay, imagine you just coming up to a traffic officer on the side of the road. What happens to your behaviour? And everybody says, well, I brake. What speed are you going now? Well, under 70. And I talk them through why that is. Why is it that we respond in that way to that particular vision of seeing the police car on the side of the road? And it's got something to do with the consequences, the potential consequences. It's about knowing that potentially in that situation I might get pulled over and the consequence will be a fine and points on my licence, and it'll be embarrassing, and if I drive for work that might be really awkward for me. But it's not just about that fine, is it? It's also about everybody else is suddenly behaving in the right way. I suddenly remembered why the rule was there and what the rule was. So as you can see, it's a very complex subject. Now, one of the issues you have with punitive sanctions in schools is that sometimes they just don't make that much difference to the kids who you have to use them on. Because if you ask teachers, they will generally explain to you that it is often the same children receiving the same sanctions for the same behaviours over and over again. So while the threat, the promise of those sanctions might keep some children from acting up, other children will end up receiving punitive measures over and over again, and sometimes this can snowball until they become very disaffected with school. So that's a starting point for thinking about consequences, which I will come back to in future videos. But as I say, just think about your own behaviour and how you respond to the threat of punishment and how you might respond differently to somebody talking through with you the reasons behind the behaviours they need you to achieve. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.